Good morning slash afternoon, friends, depending on where exactly you be. And welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, hosting this exclusively on the Synagogue News, here to let you guys know that we are indeed living in biblical times. And as has become somewhat of a tradition at this point, it has been a while since I've actually had one of these shows up. Um, Work schedule, some of you guys who watch both of the channels already know this. Work schedule has been ridiculous and it's been creating problems for my ability to get you guys a product. I shouldn't really call it a product, nobody's paying for this, but you guys know what I mean, right? Get you guys the high quality that I would like to see here. Whether or not that actually happens, of course, is is up for other people besides me to judge, but also the consistent quality, right? So we are trying to work around all that, and I do appreciate your guys' patience. But nonetheless, here we are trying to get going on this particular program, and today is April the 26th, 2022. We got a lot of interesting stuff to be talking about today. We got some updates from our friend Pastor Tony Spell. We've got some news about Twitter and its recent acquiescence, is the word, I think, from the richest man on the planet. I might have used a different word there, but basically he acquired it. But regardless, and also got some talk about food shortages and some fires that have been happening in food packaging plants at just the most inopportune time possible. So definitely a lot of interesting things to be talking about. But before we get there, just want to briefly say shalom to those who are in the live chat. Kevin, Rebuke and Reprove, and Brother Timothy, thank you all for being here. Also, for anybody who is here, please remember to like and share the video if you do enjoy the content. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. We're going to try and move this from the 3 days a week that we were trying to shoot for to 2 days a week. The reason being, I don't think I've ever actually consistently given you guys 3 days a week of Watchdog. And with schedule just kind of going up in flames, it's kind of the most inopportune time possible for me to start to learn that discipline. So instead, we're going to try and do Tuesday and Thursday weekly. Lord willing, we will actually be able to get those shows out for you guys twice a week, and that should be enough for now, right? Up until this show gets kind of on its feet, gets a consistent viewer base, and on top of that, I get the ability to really get control of my schedule because that's my biggest problem right now, right? Is trying to balance two different shows, potential future shows, a whole bunch of studying I want to do, and having a full-time job and being married and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It's a little bit, well, the phrase bite off more than you can chew immediately comes to mind, right? But I digress. I digress. I appreciate all you guys being here today. And again, yeah, please remember like, share, subscribe, hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. If you want to help contribute, you can buy either a monthly subscription to the Patreon or a one-time donation via the PayPal, and links will be provided at the end of the program if you're interested in those things. Also, please do consider following your boy on the different social media platforms. I'm on all of them. Facebook, Twitter, Gab, Parler, Minds. You can find me on any of them at the Synagogue. So if you use those, please not only share this video to those, but also consider giving your boy a follow and holler. And that would be, of course, all fine and dandy. At any rate, want to go ahead and have a discussion today before we get into the articles, as we do. So let's go ahead and do that. I want to talk today about the incredible greed we're seeing from people in regards to this Elon Musk purchase. Now, we're going to talk about the Elon Musk purchase of Twitter in a moment. Um, but one of the things that I immediately wanted to note was just how grabby everybody is with other people's money. If you go to your Twitter account, your Facebook account, whatever social media you happen to use, if you don't use social media, go read the news. Doesn't really matter where you get the information. The fact is, if you start to dip your toes in pop culture and the populace at large, right? The opinions of the populace at large, you will very quickly notice that just about everybody has an opinion about what Elon Musk could have done with his money instead of buying Twitter, as if they have any sort of say on the matter whatsoever. And of course, they don't. But nonetheless, this is the modern day world. This is what we live in. And you get these consistent tweets constantly, people talking about, well, Elon Musk could have given his $44 billion to the United Nations to help world hunger, or Elon Musk could have given his $44 billion to taxes. We need a billionaire tax. Or Elon Musk could have given his $44 million, $1 million to each American, but instead he decided to buy Twitter. They all say in collective unison. And the hilarious thing about it is none of these people, almost all of which are well off. In fact, if you're talking about the celebrities and newscasters, very well off. We're talking people who are, have six figures at least every year. We're talking people who, for the most part, have net worths over $1 million. We're talking people who, in numerous cases, have net worths over $100 million and have platforms where millions of people are listening to their every word every single day. And yet these people do nothing. Right? These people aren't giving their money to the United Nations to stop world hunger. These people aren't giving, which I'm not saying you should, by the way. I'm just making a point. They're not giving their money to the Salvation Army down the road to try and help out with, the local, homeless population, or the local population that it doesn't have as much nourishment as they should, or as much medicine as they should. Right? They're not giving their money to fight the climate crisis. That's another big one. Oh, what could a $44 billion have done to fight the climate crisis? Right? Bunch of nonsense. None of these guys are doing it. They all have millions of dollars. They all have global, international, literally, right, platforms. They ain't doing nothing. They ain't trying to sit there and make sure that they pay more taxes. They ain't doing nothing, right? But Musk, oh man, Elon Musk, he could have done so much, and yet he decided, because he's big, bad, mean, rich guy, right? He could have done so much, but instead he decided to buy Twitter, right? And they all just collectively weep over the fact that somebody is doing with their money what they see fit to do with, again, their money, as in not your money, as in the money that doesn't belong to you, Mr. and Mrs. Twitter commenter, or certainly not news anchor, which is CNN, for those of you who didn't get the joke there, right? It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. And frankly, to me, it demonstrates that we live in an incredibly entitled society that actually thinks it has the right to tell other people what they can and can't do with their money, but only so long as those people plan to do things with their money that they don't already want them to do. And what do I mean by that? Well, nobody's saying anything about Bill Gates, who also has over $100 billion with a B. B as in banana, right? 100 billion. Nobody says anything about what he could do with his money because he's a liberal. Nobody says anything about all the different stuff that we could see from Paul Allen, or whoever the other guy, the guy who owns the Seattle Seahawks, who is the co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates. Nobody's talking about what he could do with his money because he's a liberal, right? Zuckerberg, what could Zuckerberg? Oh wait, sorry, liberal. My bad. I'm not seeing the logic here, but apparently it's so beautifully logical and true. As long as you're a liberal, you get to have control over your money, right? I'm reminded of when Bernie Sanders was asked about his not hundred, sorry, it was just over $1 million net worth, but he's rich is the point. Bernie Sanders was asked about the fact that he was rich, and he said, if you work hard, and one day you could have a best-selling book. And it's like, oh really? You all of a sudden understand capitalism? That's crazy. Man, it's almost like you're a complete and total fraud, and everybody who supports you is also a complete and total fraud. And I just wanted to get that rant out. I got a lot of opinions on the Elon Musk Twitter thing, and we're going to get to that in a later segment here in the show. But one of the opinions I have on the Elon Musk Twitter thing is literally shut up, right? Quit. It's not your money. It's literally not your money. You have no say over that money. Somebody's fair share in taxes is nothing. Okay? It's not fair that anybody pays taxes. I'm not saying that you shouldn't pay your taxes, by the way. In fact, for those of us who are Christians, the Bible commands us to pay our taxes. So I'm definitely not advocating that you shouldn't pay your taxes. But let's be honest, the fair tax is nothing. It's my money. It's not your money. You don't get to put a gun to my head and say, oh, 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever you demand is your fair share. It's not how it works. Okay. You have no say over people's money. You're not entitled to people's money. You're not entitled to the way people act with their money. Okay. I despise the fact that Lil Wayne and Tyga go out and buy a whole bar's worth of bottles every day and convince really, really dumb girls to take their shirts off for them with their money. I don't like it. Guess what? Suck it up. It's not my money, right? They can do whatever they want with their money. They earned the money. And frankly, the only person they got to answer to is God for that, right? But nonetheless, I digress. I'm just ranting at this point, but I hope you guys kind of understand the rant because it is so infuriating, so utterly infuriating to see these people and all the nonsense that they say about other people's money, but only other people who they don't approve of. At any rate, let's go ahead and get into our articles for today. We got 3 different major areas of conversation today. One is these mess hall fires or food plant fires. One is, of course, Elon Musk buying Twitter, and another one is our good friend Tony Spell and some stuff that's going on in the state of Louisiana. Since most of the people who watch this show are Christians, let's go ahead and start off with what's going on in Louisiana. So, a Louisiana lawmaker wants more protections for churches. Now, for context, for those of you who do not know, Pastor Tony Spell is pastor of Life Tabernacle Church in Central Louisiana. Central's the name of the town, by the way. It's not actually the center of Louisiana, although I'm sure it probably is close to the center. I don't really know exactly where it is. I believe it's right outside of New Orleans or Baton Rouge, one of the two. I don't really know. I'm not big on Louisiana, right? I've never been there. I never plan to be there. Point is, though, he lives in Central, pastors a church in Central, right? And roughly around the time of COVID, March, April, that whole era, right, of 2020, he was one of the, in fact, he was the original pastor to say, sorry, putting my foot down. You're not going to tell us that we're not actually allowed to worship at our designated place of worship every Sunday, right? Or Saturday if you happen to be an Adventist or a Jew or whatever, right? The point is, you don't have that right, federal and or state government or city government for that matter. And he puts his foot down. He says, we're not going to allow you to shut this down. And he got arrested for it. And then he got arrested for it again and again and again and again. And in total, I believe the last tally we had was 42 times Tony Spell got arrested for having his church open. He had to be placed on house arrest. He, of course, was put in jail for some time. He is currently being charged with criminal offenses that, if given the maximum penalty, would see him spend 3 years in prison, as well as pay a $3,000 fine. And of course, he's been fighting back against this because that just happens to be the personality type that we're dealing with. And I absolutely love it. By the way, for those of you who are interested, on my other channel, Unapologetics, I did do an interview with Tony Spell a while back. It's Unapologetics episode number 75. If you want to check that out, definitely do consider doing so. But there's your context, right? We're actually going to give a little bit more context in the sense that I want to let you guys know the Louisiana Supreme Court, for those of you who've been keeping up with this case, has yet to make a decision on the Tony Spell case. At least not one that I've been able to find. Now, the only thing I was able to find was from April the 8th. So it's certainly possible something has changed in the last 18 days, but I wasn't able to find any information that demonstrated a change in the last 18 days. But nonetheless, we do have a video here I want to go ahead and watch. It's an 11-minute video, but Tony Spell speaks very slowly, so I'm going to put it at a higher speed so we can get through it. And this is all context for this Louisiana lawmaker who now wants to have greater protections for churches in the state of Louisiana as a result of everything that has been going on here with the the government and all that. Now, real briefly, one thing I do want to say before I actually get to this video, sorry about the stuttering there, is just simply this, and that is, it really isn't necessary for us to have more protections for churches. Not to say I don't support this lawmaker, because I do. However, it's another one of those signs of the times we live in that this lawmaker feels it is necessary to give greater protections for churches. The First Amendment says the right to free exercise of religion shall not be infringed. That's a tiny bit of a paraphrase, but that is the communication that it's putting forward. It also says that the right to freedom of assembly, peaceably, of course, shall not be infringed. Church is two of those 4 categories that are actually protected. Technically, you could say 6 because there's 2 subclauses in the First Amendment of the Constitution. I digress. 2 of the 4 categories that we look at the First Amendment is protecting, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. Freedom of religion, that's a church. Freedom of assembly, that's a church, right? So it's entirely unnecessary for us to actually have greater protections for churches, at least on paper. Unfortunately, though, the world is manifest in such a way that on paper doesn't really suffice. And that's why this lawmaker feels the need to move forward with greater protections. And again, I do agree with him. I think we do need to have the states you almost recommitting themselves. It's almost like renewing your vows, right? Recommitting themselves to the idea that, hey, we as religious individuals, as individuals who want to have, certain elements of the press, as individuals who want to say certain things, as individuals who want to petition the government, as individuals who want to assemble, all the different things that the Constitution protects. Individuals who want to own our firearms, right? Our rights are to be protected. That is the designation and function of government, right? They need to come back and recommit themselves to that proposition. But I digress. Let's go ahead and I've said that like 4 times in this. I digress on digression. At any rate, let's go ahead and get into this particular video. This is from Pastor Spell himself. Louisiana Supreme Court update still waiting. This is April 8th, 2022, but I was unable to find any information beyond this. So it seems like this is still current. I know it's really weird in the 21st century, the post social media world, to have such a slow moving story, right? I mean, they were in session on March the 22nd. He was originally arrested in April of 2020. This is, one second. Just got a comment that says I was muted. I'm going to continue to speak right now as a form of testing. I don't know if you guys can hear this or not. Okay, never mind. Sorry, it turned out to. All right. All right, we're good. Actually, we're good. Perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into this. Again, I know it's odd that this has been so slow moving. We're 2 years out now, but actually, for those of you who are familiar with the government's attempted persecutions of American citizens, this is actually quite common. If you need some background as to how long these cases can take sometimes, just give you as some reading if you choose to take it. The stories of Cliven Bundy and his sons, Ammon Bundy for governor of Idaho, by the way, or the story of Todd Engel, or the story of Eric Parker, or the story of Ruby Ridge. I can't remember that. I think it's Randy Weaver was the guy at Ruby Ridge, but I can't actually remember off the top of my head. And all these other kinds of things takes forever. It's actually kind of amazing that it didn't take forever for John MacArthur, but that was partially because California was already laxing the laws anyways. Whereas in Louisiana, yes, deep South, Bible Belt, conservative Christian Louisiana, they refuse to let Tony Spell quote off the hook, right? Which is one of the reasons why I keep focusing on this story, by the way. I know I keep saying I want to play the video and then going into a rant, but I just want you guys to understand, and this is nothing against Pastor MacArthur. I was 100% with Pastor MacArthur. I think Pastor MacArthur is a great teacher. However, the fact that he's the one everybody talked about, when there are plenty of pastors who not only were doing this before him, but who also are being much more heavily persecuted as a result. Friends, 2 years after the pandemic, Spell is facing prison time, right? For having the audacity to have a church open. And frankly, I think the reason most people don't want to talk about it is because of the fact that he's a oneness Pentecostal, but that is entirely irrelevant to the point. The man's fighting for our religious freedom in the middle of the Bible Belt. And honestly, he's losing. And part of the reason he's losing is because nobody wants to talk about it. But with all that being said, let's get into the video. Let me know, guys, in the comment section if you can't hear the video or if my speed is too high, because I am going to put it at a greater speed, which I actually have not yet done. Let's go ahead and get into this, and then we'll also have all of this for context when we talk about this Louisiana lawmaker who now wants to give greater protections to churches as a result of what's going on with Pastor Spell.
When you see that in order to produce, that you must obtain permission from those who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods, but in favors. When you see men getting richer by graft and by pull than by work, and that your laws do not protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, then you may know that your society is doomed. Ayn Rand said that in her book, Atlas Shrugged, which is banned reading in the United States of America, pulled out of the public school library bookshelves because they fear her teachings, because her teachings are truth. Many teachings, truth, and the bedrock.
I do just want to briefly say, as somebody who was once very much into Ayn Rand, she has a lot of good ideas. I don't think it's wise to say she's 100% truthful. She was very, very strongly committed to her atheism, and I think that bled into some of her philosophy. Like, for example, she kind of saw greed and selfishness as ultimately deriving from good, right? Um, and so there's a lot of positive that Ayn Rand said, but I do want to clarify. Um, I think she's a little bit less godly than we would like, and I use that adjective very deliberately. But anyways,
Fundamental principles that made America the great nation that it is are being canceled, are being erased, are being censored. And what is being promoted but the new agendas of wokeism, transgenderism, rebellion against conformity. As the psalmist said, all of the foundations of the earth are out of course. This is present day America. Today is April the 8th, 2022. We're now 18 days removed from our Supreme Court oral argument, where the state of Louisiana versus myself, we brought up motions to quash 6 of the arrests that were brought upon us early on in the pandemic. That would be March 14th through March 31st of 2022. If you have the opportunity, go and watch the video of the oral argument between our attorney, Jeff Wittenbrink, and the governor's attorneys, Daryl Papillon, Matthew Block, and a host of other proceedings that day. 7 Supreme Court justices, 5 Republicans, Chief Justice is independent, and 1 Democrat. In those proceedings, you will see how it was very favorable on our behalf that even the governor's attorneys were arguing our case almost as good as we were arguing our case, because they realized that legally they're on shaky ground. And judicially, there's no way that the Supreme Court justices can rule in the favor of the governor in the unconstitutional illegal arrests for holding church during the pandemic. That's what the charges are. Failure to comply with governor's emergency orders holding church during the pandemic. Many, many good points were made by the.
And that's true. If you watch, and some of you maybe already have, some of you unfortunately may have watched my brief little look into it, which I'm going to do a whole video just kind of reviewing the arguments that were made at the Louisiana Supreme Court. I'm also probably going to take my other video down just simply because I don't like the way that I behaved in it. I was particularly angry at some stuff, and you can definitely see that in the video, but nonetheless, some of you guys probably have seen that video. But it is very true. When we have you have this situation where these guys are going to the Louisiana Supreme Court, and they're, laying out these arguments, and the arguments that are being presented are just very clearly going one direction, such that you can even start to see a demeanor change in the justices themselves, right? A lot of the justices, with the exception of one, seem to seem to have a very strong predisposition against Pastor Spell and his legal team. But when you actually start to hear the case continue forward and the arguments being presented, that starts to just slowly die over the course of an hour's time. And there's an obvious reason for it, right? The Constitution very clearly says that we are able to go to church, we are able to practice our religion, is the way we should put it, because that's more technically accurate, as we see fit. That exercise, the free exercise of religion, shall not be infringed, right? And it also says that we have the right to peaceably assemble, excuse me, peaceably assembly. That doesn't make any sense. Peaceably assemble, right? So really, you have absolutely no grounds to stand on. And by the way, one thing that I learned, over the course of this case, is that that's particularly true in Louisiana, because Louisiana actually has laws which specifically say a emergency action or emergency declaration cannot actually remove the liberties protected under the Bill of Rights. In other words, if there's like a hurricane in Louisiana, Hurricane Katrina, for example, right? You now have a state of emergency in the state of Louisiana, right? Meaning that a whole bunch of the law has been suspended. It's essentially martial law. So they can do things like forcefully evacuate you. They can do things like, make sure that you are, not a designated part of a certain organization that could be criminal in the case of, a state of emergency for a war or something like that. But et cetera, right? They can forcibly shut down certain areas, like public areas, like beaches and stuff like that, or parks or whatever, and that would obviously be for another reason. In other words, they have the ability to start shutting down stuff that you would normally consider privileges and rights on the books, right? Varying from state to state are the rules around your First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment liberties, and so on and so forth, right? In the state of Louisiana, it actually specifically states you cannot violate those liberties, right? In other words, you might be able to forcefully evacuate some people because a hurricane's about to come, right? But you're not legally allowed to take away their firearms in the process. You're not legally allowed to infringe on their ability to follow their religion in the process. You're not legally allowed to get rid of their ability to have a quick and speedy trial or be protected by double jeopardy laws in the process, right? Not every state is actually like that. Unfortunately, a lot of states are pretty handsy when it comes to their emergency declarations, to the point of basically just tossing the Constitution out as soon as a emergency is declared. So both in the federal government and in the Louisiana state government, there is simply no case for the prosecution against Pastor Tony Spell. And you very quickly see that, dawning on those who are actually presiding over this case in the what would you call that? The session, I guess, right? Court session that is actually in question here, which is part of the reason why they're, at least in my opinion, that they are taking a very long period of time, is because I think they know legally what they have to do. And I think most of them, with the exception of the Chief Justice, who actually does appear to be on Pastor Spell's side, I think most of them don't want to. I think most of them were kind of down with this power grab. Unfortunately, a lot of people in power are down with this power grab because, unfortunately, human beings very much like to force their agenda on people. And then that's one thing that I think we often forget, right? We often think it's got to be something like a conspiracy theory or something along those lines, right? People are in a cabal getting together and stuff like that and having conversations. And that happens for sure. That totally happens. But a lot of times these things can just be explained by basic human nature. Humans are greedy. Humans are selfish. Humans want everybody to listen to them. They're incredibly narcissistic, megalomaniacal, right? And humans will jump on an opportunity to satisfy their base urges, right? And that's exactly what the pandemic demonstrated for us. Anyways, I'm continuing on. Let's go ahead and get back to this video.
Chief Justices and arguing, one of which, to the governor's attorneys, a judge says was his defiance just a little bit too public for the governor. Meaning, had we had church quietly behind closed doors and not been on the corner of one of the busiest corners in the city of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, would that have been all right? And it probably would have. But there was no way to hide when you're running 37 buses up and down an 80-mile radius, highways and byways and interstate system, while the whole world is shut down. It's kind of hard to hide that. It's also hard to hide 2,000 plus people being water baptized by immersion in the name of Jesus in our baptistry and in our lake. It's also hard to hide notable miracles, people being healed of brain tumors, people being healed of cancer and heart disease. Notable miracles documented by medical science, if you can trust medical science anymore. It's hard to, because it's compromised, and there are people on the take, as there are ministries on the take, as there are politicians on the take, as it's hard to find a judicial system anymore that gives justice because we have a legal system. So today is day 18, and we still don't have a verdict or ruling on the motions to quash. And that's from the Louisiana Supreme Court. We also have the federal court case that was ruled on.
And I'd just like to point out we're now at day 36, still without a ruling. So this was 18 days ago, and that was already 18 days. We're now at day 36, and we still have not gotten a ruling from the Louisiana Supreme Court on this matter.
After being held for 7 months and 7 days, the Fifth Circuit Court ruled in our favor on June 7, 2021, and sent that federal court case, which is 9 crimes, we've committed 9 crimes, back to the federal court. The federal court said everything we did was wrong. However, we claim qualified immunity. The sheriff, the chief of police, the governor all have immunity, and they qualify for that because they're elected officials, and elected officials are immune from lawsuits. They're immune from doing wrong, is what basically is what they're saying. That's not good for any American. It's certainly not good whenever the Constitution clearly states, and the Bill of Rights clearly states, that a governor's emergency power shall in no way diminish the rights of its citizens, which are clearly stated in the Constitution of the United States, shall in no way diminish the liberties. You can't diminish our liberties because of a pandemic, because of a virus, because people are dying, because of whatever your next argument is.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was talking to you guys about earlier when I was saying in Louisiana in particular, they not only do you have the Bill of Rights already existing in the, not only in the state of Louisiana, of course, but in the whole United States, but on top of that, in the state of Louisiana in particular, there is laws that say you also cannot you cannot actually violate the Bill of Rights by means of an emergency declaration or martial law or anything like that. And that's something that has been used actually by the Spell legal team, in this particular case. Now, I do want to briefly address a couple things here, but I'm going to do it at the end of the program. So for those of you guys who are asking some questions, Richard, Neal, Brother Timothy, I've decided I'm going to do something here where, in order to get some audience interaction, but also make sure that we're not, stopping the program for audience interaction, I'm going to go ahead and record some of the points that you guys make that it sounds like you'd like to get a response from me from. And then at the end, we'll go ahead and have almost like a Q&A, right? I figure this is a news show. That's probably a wise thing to do. So, and by the way, we have somebody in the live chat, Kevin's Biblical Discussions, who points out Bilderberg. And so, that's a good point. And I just want to remind you guys, just because something can be explained by a appeal to human nature, I guess you could call it, doesn't mean that there isn't a cabal, right? Like I said, both of those things are true. People, and even other things, right? People are dumb, people are evil, people are conspiratorial, and people are just people. And all of those are true at the exact same time, right? But nonetheless, I just wanted to point that out there.
And by the way, the next argument is 50 million people are locked down in Shanghai, China at this moment. They're being closed into hospitals. Doors are being welded in hospital rooms, and people are being starved to death. And they're being locked down and able to leave the parameter where they are because there's this new virus that's being created. And it'll soon make its way to the shores of America and Canada and different parts of the world.
And that, by the way, is 100% true. It has not only been reported on by some of the news agencies that we might trust, some of the conservative news agencies, but it has also been reported on by a lot of the mainstream news agencies. Excuse me. Not Louisiana, excuse me, China right now, like 2022, April 26th, right this very second, has people who are starving in their homes and in hospitals, unable to leave, excuse me, because of a lockdown for some new variation of this virus. Excuse me again. And the really interesting thing about that, of course, is the fact that a lot of the woke politicians and woke leaders here in the United States actually support China and support China's whole method of dealing with this kind of a quote emergency. Those of you who may not read too much of the news may have missed just how many high-ranking news analysts and high-ranking politicians and very popular celebrities who have a lot of sway because of how far their voice carries and all this other kind of stuff. How many people who are considered well-established who were saying quite blatantly that they thought China's method of complete and total lockdown was good and that it was going to crush the pandemic. And there was tons of people who were saying, oh, see, China was able to open with little to no problem after just a month. And it's because of the fact that they just squashed civil liberties. And those people who didn't want to be that crazy would go on and talk about South Korea and Australia, who were also quite bad. Of course, never want to talk about people like Denmark, but I digress on that. The point there being that, when Pastor Spell brings up just how bad it actually is in China, people often want to say, well, that can't happen here. Well, the current president of the United States thinks that that's a dandy idea. And the vice president does also. And the Senate majority leader and the Speaker of the House of Representatives. That just so happens to be the most powerful people in the executive and legislative branches. And you're not going to convince me that Chief Justice Roberts, excuse me, has any sort of a inclination towards liberty. I don't know if he'd actually go as far as to say China's dope, but he certainly is not a big fan of the United States Constitution, right? So, this is something we do need to be very vigilant about, and in numerous different ways. I mean, for those of us who are Christians, I think we need to be praying constantly about this. We need to be praying for revival, because that's really the only way that the nation does get saved, if indeed it is in God's will that the nation be saved, right? But also, for those of us who still have the ability to use, our dollar to vote, so to speak, right? Stop supporting companies that actively want to see you killed. I understand The Lion King's a great movie. That does not mean you should get Disney Plus and actively give money to people who are just completely down with, in fact, give millions of dollars to the government in China who has people in concentration camps, right? You could also, talk about CNN, of course. You could talk about, Amazon, Facebook, right? I know a lot of these things you can use for free. Don't get me wrong, and I'm not necessarily against anybody using anything for free, because if you can, if you can use something to your advantage that is unchangeable, like for example Google, right? Unfortunately, you really can't change the fact that Google exists. You can do certain things to get around it. I do recommend using DuckDuckGo, though it's not as high quality of a service. Unfortunately, it'll get there, right? The more people use it, the more likely it is that it gets there. But there's no need to be giving your money to people who actively want to see you crushed, right? And that's, by the way, for those of you who may be confused, that's not canceling. It's just called capitalism, right? We're not saying, for example, that the NFL needs to be shut down, right? I'm just saying that I'm not going to give them my money. It's that simple. Or, in other ways, obviously, you can elect city officials, county officials, state officials who have some sort of a liberty centric outlook on politics, who have an ideology that is based in a solid Christological understanding of Scripture, all these other kinds of different things you can say. The point is just to say, for those of us who have these opportunities to vote with our dollar, to vote in general, to get down and pray, to speak about these sorts of things, we need to take those opportunities, because time is running out. And how fast is it running out? Nobody really knows until it runs out, right? We're not aware of just where we are on the clock until the clock strikes midnight. But I think we can all kind of get a general sense of how close to midnight it actually is, right? And well, that's basically it. There's no need to continue on. Let's get into the rest of this, because we have other stuff to talk about. We haven't even gotten to the headliner yet.
The world, and when it does, we're going to have to have the courage to do what we didn't do 26 months ago, and that is stand up for right, keep our churches open, practice our religious liberties and our civil liberties. Yes, you'll be canceled. Yes, you will be persecuted. Yes, you will be arrested. Yes, you will be terminated from your employment. Yes, you will be ostracized from your family and your practice, your law practice, your medical practice, all of it. It comes with the territory. You're in good company. This has been going on for thousands of years. During a revolution, that's what happens. There's no middle ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is either claimed by God or counterclaimed by the devil. When you stand up for right, there's a long list of actions that are going to come against you. But you have to say that I'm going to rise above the tyranny. Rebellion against tyranny is obedience to God. You're going to have to determine in your heart that you're going to stand for right and not just blend in like a chameleon on a checkerboard. You're going to be brave and courageous, and that you'll have the intestinal fortitude to stand up for right, because you won't get another chance after this. You only get one chance to do it right the first time. And every inch that is given up of freedom, we'll never get that back. It never comes back again. In news, Biden's federal vaccine mandate has just been ruled by a federal court that it was legal, that it's constitutional. So many of you federal employees are afraid for your jobs right now. Let me help you. God won't take anything from you without giving you something better. These are shaky times, but we have unshakable faith. April the 8th, 2022. We'll see you soon. God bless you in Jesus' name.
All right. And so as of April the 22nd, 2022, that is still the case. In other words, the ruling has not yet been made. Pastor Spell is still facing these charges, which carry up to 3 years in prison and a $3,000 fine if he is held to the maximum penalty. And actually, it might even be greater than that, because I was under the impression he was only being charged with the failure to meet the vaccine mandates, or the mandates. I don't even know exactly how they word it, but I thought there was only 6 charges. If there's 9 charges, that would actually be 4.5 years in prison, because it's 6 months in incarceration for each individual charge. But if you go for longer than a year, then you go to prison, not jail. So 4.5 years in prison and a $4,500 fine would be the maximum if he's actually got 9 charges. And those of you who are concerned about this, I just want to say again, be speaking about this, be praying about this, give this kind of information to your pastors and congregants and friends and family and all that. And let's make sure that this kind of case gets just as much airtime as a Johnny Depp trial, which, not to say anything about what I feel about that particular trial, but it's just simply the case that this is certainly much more important. Ghislaine Maxwell, Julian Assange, these things are certainly much more important than anything we're going to be seeing in a Johnny Depp trial, right? But I digress on that. So, with that as context, there is a Louisiana lawmaker who wishes to give greater protections to churches as a result of these recent attacks on religious liberty. So here's the article. It's from KALB.com. I believe that is a NBC affiliate that is local to the Louisiana area, but I'm not 100% sure if they are I think I just said NBC affiliate, but it might even be CBS also. Regardless, lawmaker wants to issue new protections for churches. This article is originally from Chris Rosato, and it says thus. Oh, sorry. Should probably get scrolled a little bit down so you guys can potentially read. I don't know how many people actually like to read along here, but I assume at least some people do. So, anyways, State Representative Alan Seabaugh, a Republican from Shreveport, wants to give churches more protection with a bill he presented at the Louisiana State Capitol on Monday, April the 25th. That was yesterday, for those of you who are watching this live. Apart from what Governor John Bel Edwards called essential businesses, almost everyone was asked to close their doors during the beginning phases of the pandemic. Seabaugh said that when it comes to churches, that should never be allowed to happen again. Once COVID spread to Louisiana, Governor Edwards and the Department of Health almost immediately issued a public health emergency, effectively asking almost anyone to temporarily close their doors. Quote, essentially, if you're going to close churches and leave abortion clinics and casinos open, we're going to say that that may not be a particularly good idea, end quote, Seabaugh said. He wants to make it clear with his bill, sorry, let me go ahead and scroll down here for you guys. He wants to make it clear with his bill that if another public health emergency comes around, churches will be left open as much as possible. So in other words, the point of the bill is to say specifically, churches cannot be shut down in case of an emergency, right? And that's the added protection which he aims to give to churches. Quote, if you're going to draw a line, the churches should be treated no worse than the least restrictive measure that you put on other secular businesses, end quote, continued Seabaugh. Even while under phase one, stores like Walmart and Home Depot were considered essential and were allowed to remain open to a certain degree. Essentially, HB, which stands for House Bill, HB 953 would allow churches to hold in-person gatherings during a public health emergency as long as stores like Walmart are allowed to remain open, even at a limited capacity. A bill like this could have spared Life Tabernacle Church pastor Tony Spell from his legal battles. Spell repeatedly defied the governor's orders, holding services at his church with more than 10 people in attendance, leading to an arrest, multiple arrests, multiple citations, and a number of court appearances. Quote, he says all these people behind me are lawbreakers, and we're not, end quote, said Spell outside of his 19th JDC, outside of the 19th JDC, back in 2021. Quote, the lawbreakers, are right over there in the governor's mansion, end quote. But the governor's staff provided this statement on Monday. This is April the 25th that they provided the statement. Quote, initially, the size of gatherings was limited based on the science and data concerning the transmission of the virus. The governor worked closely with faith leaders throughout the pandemic, and all were encouraged to hold services as safely as possible to protect their congregants, end quote. The bill passed unanimously and awaits further debate on the House floor. So it's very likely that we could actually see this bill move forward in Louisiana. And again, the bill, at least from what we're hearing, specifically says, hey, you are not able to shut down churches in case of and specifically churches, specifying churches. You are not able to shut down churches and places of worship in cases of a pandemic. Or in times when we have a pandemic or any other sort of a emergency ruling for that matter. It's kind of a redundancy because, again, we have the First Amendment of the Constitution, which very clearly states that the free exercise of religion shall not be infringed, and which very clearly states that the right to peaceably assemble shall not be infringed. We also have laws in the book in the state of Louisiana that say that an emergency declaration cannot violate your core essential liberties. And so in that sense, you could say, I mean, it sounds like this is kind of a redundant law, right? At the same time, though, those two laws don't seem to have stopped anything in this particular case, and Pastor Tony Spell is still going to, the Supreme Court is still facing upwards of, I guess now 4.5 years in prison, a $4,500 fine, and is facing tons and tons of slander, on behalf of, or not on behalf, but by the mouth of, you should say, news organizations like The Advocate and CNN, and also the Justice Department there in Louisiana, and so on and so forth, right? Excuse me. And so, the thinking here is these laws that are already on the books have not stopped what is supposed to be stopped. So now let's get real specific and act like we're talking to a bunch of 5-year-olds, because apparently we are. and say specifically places of worship cannot be shut down in times of an emergency. Personally, I agree with this. I think it needs to be a cross religion thing in order to ensure that there is not special protections given to one faith over the other, which is a violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. In other words, you should not be able to shut down a mosque or a synagogue or a Buddhist temple in the United States, right? Just like you shouldn't be able to shut down a church. I think both of those should be the case. And so when we read this bill, which I have not yet read the whole thing, I would like to see phraseology like places of worship. Instead of just saying something like churches. Obviously, I think that should include churches. Obviously, I am not a Buddhist. I am not a Muslim. I'm not a Sikh, any of those other kinds of things. But I do very much appreciate the freedom of religion that we have here. And the only way that we're going to get freedom of religion is to make sure that all of the different religions are indeed free. It's not a getting together of different religions. It's actually more like a, hey, we're each going to live and let live and do our own separate thing. Y'all sit down and shut up, and we'll sit down and shut up, and then we'll have our debates and evangelisms and proselytizing and all that with full protection of the law. But regardless, I do agree with the general theme that we have here, provided that that is the stipulation, and provided that this is the only real point of the bill is to specify places of worship cannot be shut down by the government, even in times of a emergency. 100% down, all good with it, right? Obviously, we are very likely going to see the bill passed. It passed unanimously in I think it was the House of Representatives that it had passed in. And if I am understanding correctly, it's going to be going to the Senate. I know the article said it's going to have more debate on the House floor. But I'm fairly certain that is how bills work in the state of Louisiana, just like in anywhere else, is that they are voted on, by the House of Representatives and then move up to the state Senate. Regardless, there is definitely some potential pitfalls here. One of the potential pitfalls is creating a Christocentric government, which I know a lot of people they think they would appreciate, especially a lot of fundamentalist Christians think they would appreciate a Christocentric government. The thing is, you wouldn't. And the reason we know that is because anybody who would put a Taoist or a Buddhist or a Muslim down because of the fact that they don't follow the right faith is going to be perfectly willing to put you down because they don't think you follow the right version of their faith, right? We have tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of historical evidence demonstrating this. State churchianity does not work. It's never worked. It will never work, at least not until Jesus Christ himself takes the throne. And before that time, we certainly do need to make sure that we don't have one religion being, catapulted over the others in terms of its privileges and liberties. That will absolutely, I promise you, go the wrong way. And again, I know a lot of people, especially in my own particular camp, don't like that. They don't like the idea. John MacArthur has said that he's not for religious liberty, and Douglas Wilson has said that he's not for religious liberty, and Spencer Smith has said that he doesn't really like the concept of fighting for a pagan's right to blaspheme God. And I get that. I get the Christian inclination to say, I want my government to be Christocentric. I want my government to be biblically based. I don't want to fight for somebody's liberties to do things that I consider to be sinful. I understand it completely. However, just a cursory glance at history, my friends, will tell us that is not a good idea. A cursory glance at history will tell us, just look at Martin Luther, who we all think of, if we're Protestants, as a hero. Look at the way he thought about Jews and what he thought the state should do to Jews. Look at the way he thought about Anabaptists, which every single one of you is, by the way. And when I say that, I am speaking about people who are in my same camp, fundamentalist evangelicals, right? We're all Anabaptists. What does that mean? We believe in baptism by immersion, and we don't believe in the baptism of babies, right? Well, guess what? Martin Luther thought that the state should drown you. Martin Luther wasn't real big on the concept of a low ecclesiology, which, again, almost every fundamentalist Christian in the United States of America, as well as most other places around the world, has low ecclesiology. What does that mean? You don't have a bishop position. You don't have somebody who's like controlling a whole diocese. You don't have a church somewhere in Salt Lake City or Rome or something along those lines that you are held accountable to. Martin Luther didn't like that either. And so, not to hate on Martin Luther, he's still a hero. He's still somebody who was used mightily of God, in my opinion. But the point is, you don't want people to start saying, hey, I have the right to dictate what is and is not proper religious practice, right? And that is a potential pitfall of, any law that somebody is going to put forward for, for greater protections on churches. And this is why I say I think the law needs to be worded in a general way. It needs to say places of worship cannot be shut down, because that accounts for everybody, right? It accounts for the mosque, it accounts for the temple, it accounts for the synagogue, it accounts for the church, right? And that is the way I think that you actually get, past this potential pitfall. It also, of course, has the pitfall of being just completely redundant. But again, I don't know if it necessarily is redundant. It is redundant on paper, but as far as in action, it doesn't appear that what we have on paper is doing anything. That might be a conversation for another time in another sense too, because that has a lot to do with the personality type of our society, if that's even a proper way to term it. I digress. The last sentence of this article, last two sentences say WAFB also reached out to the Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops. The agency said it is not taking a position on the proposal just yet. Instead, it wants to wait to see how the bill makes its way through the legislature. And then that's the end of the article. So I personally am a supporter of this bill, provided that it is a bill that accounts for the different potential pitfalls of giving a church greater protections. And again, I think the way that you account for those things is by being general with the terminology and making sure that you are actually creating a equal law for all places of worship, saying places of worship cannot be shut down because of an emergency declaration. If that's what we're getting, I am in support of it. If that's not what we're getting, we need to edit it, potentially completely disregard it. And, obviously, it would behoove us to probably read the entire bill, which I myself have not yet done. But I will do. I will make sure to do. And then we'll have a new opinion for you guys, or potentially the same opinion backed up by the facts, once that information has been, engorged upon, so to speak. Anywho, let's go on to our next particular point, and that is, I know we're already hit an hour, but we're just going to go and have a long show today. I apologize if somebody is having to leave or anything like that. You can always come back, right? On top of that, I do upload these onto Rumble, so even if YouTube decides to take them down, you can always go to my Rumble and look up the synagogue there, and you will find episodes of the Watchdog. In fact, I recommend that you do that because, as it turns out, the conglomeration of liberal goodness, wink wink nudge nudge, that is Google, isn't really big on conservative talk shows. So it's highly likely that this show will end up at some point disappearing, and the best way for you to prevent that is to you can't prevent it, so subscribe on Rumble, and you can potentially still get the show there if and when that happens. Anyways, Fire in the Mess Hall is my next headliner here, and this is actually the headliner that we're going to talk about today, although you would probably be fooled if you just listened to the last hour, because I, for an hour, was talking about Pastor Tony Spell. But regardless, people have been talking a lot about food shortages and about supply chain shortages and about labor shortages and all that other kind of stuff, and unfortunately, that has been magnified a little bit, not only by the trucker convoy in Canada, which is not saying anything against the truckers. I'm just pointing out what is unfortunately the facts, and also by a recent string of fires that has occurred in major food processing plants. Now, a lot of people are saying this is some kind of a conspiracy to magnify food shortages. A lot of other people are pointing out that, unfortunately, fires of this nature are actually incredibly common. It just so happens that this is a very inopportune time. Regardless, it is a problem. Regardless of why it's a problem or why it's actually happening, it is a problem, and it does have the potential to have pretty nasty and negative impact. So let's go ahead and read here. This is from Western Standard. Exclusive: food shortages magnified by a string of destroyed food processing plants. This was published on April the 23rd, 2022 by one Melody Resden. And let's go ahead and read the article here. Last Thursday, firefighters contended with a massive blaze at California's Taylor Farms plant. That same day, an airplane crashed into Idaho's Gem State processing facility. Idaho is actually right here where I be. Food shortages have been exacerbated by a string of fires, plane crashes, and explosions at nearly 24 processing facilities across the United States and Canada. Nearly 24. For those of you who are unaware of what a dozen is, that would be 24. I know most people probably do, but just in case there's somebody out there, hey, I'm not 100% sure, what is a dozen? That would be nearly 24 food processing plants in Canada and the U.S. The most recent happened on Thursday in Georgia when a small plane crashed shortly after takeoff into a General Mills plant just east of Atlanta. 2 occupants of the plane were killed in the crash, as reported by the New York Post. Excuse me. A massive fire on Monday night destroyed parts of the Azure Standard headquarters in Oregon, a company that self-describes as the USA's largest independent food distributor. The company said basically any liquid product, such as honey, oil, and vinegar, will be out of stock due to the fire, as reported by Vision Times. The company also said it lost its fruit packing and carob product facility in the blaze, but said the effects will be minimal as fruit harvesting season hasn't yet started, which, I guess you take your wins where you can find them, right? But yeah, we're starting to see a bunch of fires. It does appear to be more than the average. Absolutely. Again, it is incredibly common to have fires of these nature, but some of these things are happening for things that are not common, like plane crashes, right? We've seen 2 different plane crashes into food processing facilities. But on top of that, there is also just the sheer number of them, right? 24 in 2 months, or at least they said nearly a dozen. So, probably somewhere like 22, 23 in 2 months. That's a lot of food processing plants to be destroyed in a very short period of time. And people are obviously concerned because of the results that this I said that right. The results this could have, the consequences this could have is a little bit better. And people are also concerned, of course, because they want to know why exactly this is taking place. What's the deal? Why is it that there is so many fires in such a short period of time at such a specific kind of location, namely a food processing plant, and also at a time when it appears like we're running headfirst into a potential food shortage? Although, luckily, I don't think many of us have yet experienced any kind of a food shortage. I know some prices have gone up, but thank the Lord, it seems like most people, at least in the United States and Canada, are well fed. But people are reasonably concerned that that's not always going to be the case, especially when you have these kinds of things happening, where you have tons of blockages in the supply line, and then now you also have destruction of the supply line, or at least the processing plants, where where there is a the kind of beginning, I guess, the genesis, if you will, of this supply chain. Now, one thing I do want to point out real briefly is if you go and look this up on Google, you'll find, factchecker.com and Snopes and all this other kind of stuff. You'll find things like, well, this is false because we have explainable reasons for these fires, or we find this false because these kinds of fires have happened in other years. But of course, that's not really what people's big concern is, right? We know that these kinds of fires do happen frequently, and we know that these kinds of fires have all had explainable, quote unquote, reason, right? In other words, we know that the plane crashed into the food processing plants, and these other things that have caused fires. So that's not what's actually a matter of concern. What's a matter of concern, what is creating the quote rumor, what is creating the conspiracy, conspiracy theory, I should say, is how many fires are occurring and in how short of a period of time these fires are occurring. Um, and it kind of goes to show a little bit the deception, I think, that we have from fact checkers. Um, these fact checkers will say things that are not actually the point of contention in the first place, and then turn around and say, yeah, so therefore this particular theory is false. And I'm not saying anything about the theory being true per se. I don't necessarily know. I think it's concerning, certainly. There's a lot of, even if it was just 16, right? Which is what the Snopes article I had read earlier had actually said. Um, I don't know. It seems to me like it's incredibly deceptive, and that 16 is actually a lot bigger than we would probably like to imagine. Um, a lot bigger than we'd be comfortable with, certainly. But anyways, I continue to digress on that. Um, let's see, where did I leave off here? The company also said, I already read that, the fruit packaging. So last Thursday, firefighters contended with a massive blaze at Taylor Farms packaged salad plant in Salinas, California, a key agricultural region, 177 kilometers south of San Francisco. I don't know why we're doing things in kilometers. I live in the United States of America. I'm sure this is probably a Canadian newspaper. But anyways, the same day, an airplane crashed into Idaho's Gem State processing facility, a plant said to process 18,000 acres worth of potatoes each year. The pilot of the plane did not survive. However, no employees were injured, reported Vision Times. And of course, living in the state of Idaho and working in the restaurant industry, that was one that I had a little bit of firsthand experience with in a sense, right? I wasn't there. But, there's now been discussions about this particular event basically all over where I am, right? People talking about it as far as like just the local tea, so to speak, right? But on top of that, people talking about it in my place of business because we're kind of wondering, okay, is this going to impact, what we're actually going to be doing here as far as, as a unit? And to a certain extent, it has. Um, the wages have all gone up where I'm working, but on top of that, the prices for everything has gone up where I'm working. And the prices for all the product we're purchasing has gone up where I'm working. And the prices for all the food that I go and get at the local store is going up. I have to actually ask my wife what the exact price was because she would remember better than I would. But I believe whole milk gallons were about $1.20, $1.30 in 2019, and they're nearly $3 now, which is an over 100% increase, right? That is I mean, regardless of anything else, that's a big deal, right? And that has to do with things like inflation, things like a whole bunch of people being fired, things like the trucker convoy, which is not a criticism of the truckers themselves, but it did exacerbate the problem. And then on top of all of that, now you have food processing plants lighting on fire and at an alarming rate, right? And the point is just to say there is already some impact we're seeing, not just from this, but from numerous other, um, you know, uh, problems we're seeing in society as well, including but not limited to inflation, including but not limited to a labor shortage, including but not limited to this trend of fires kind of lighting up. And now I do want to point out real quickly there are some newspapers that are being a little bit deceptive about this. For example, there are newspapers which are listing fires that happened all the way back in January of 2021 or even back to 2020 in their list of food processing plant fires. That obviously is deceptive to say the least, right? That was over a year and a half ago at this point, or almost a year and a half ago, excuse me, at this point. But the exact same thing is true in the opposite direction. There is also a lot of people who are deceptively saying, well, hey, this is just a normal amount of fires and there's nothing to see here, when indeed there is definitely something to see here. On April 13th, firefighters from several departments in Maine helped battle a massive fire that destroyed East Conway Beef and Pork, Butcher Shop, and Meat Market in Center Conway, New Hampshire. Investigators did not indicate what caused the fire, reported ABC affiliate WMTW in Portland, Maine. In March, KAIT TV reported a major fire that forced the closure of the Nestle plant in Jonesboro, Arkansas. The plant makes frozen foods, particularly Hot Pockets. The frozen foods plant announced its plan for a $100 million expansion last year. And you can see the picture of the fire there. This is specifically the Nestle one in Jonesboro. Actually, you can see Nestle right here on your screen, as well as Hot Pockets right there, and also Stouffer's, and something else right here. I think that's DiGiorno. I don't know. Not important. Excuse me, man. The Penobscot McCrum potato processing facility in Belfast, Maine, was also destroyed by fire in March. Officials believe a deep fryer was behind the fire, as reported by ABC affiliate WMTW News 8. In Canada, fire crews and paramedics responded after an explosion at the Centre de... I'm totally going to pronounce this wrong, just so you know. Centre de Valorisation de l'Aliment de l'Estre. I don't know if the French roll their R's. But regardless, it's a French name, so it's probably in Quebec. Yeah, Sherbrooke, Quebec. An industrial food preparation and processing facility in Sherbrooke, Quebec. 5 people were injured in the March explosion that turned into a major fire. And let me check. Yes, that is actually a photo of the Sherbrooke fire right here. Moving down. In late March, a fire at the Maricopa Food Pantry, a food bank in Arizona, saw 50,000 pounds worth of food burn up, and yet another blaze at the Texas-based Rio Fresh severely damaged the onion processing facility. In February, a portion of Wisconsin River Meats was destroyed by fire, according to Channel 3000 News. The Boston-based company said the old portion of its plant was a total loss from the fire. Another fire in February, sparked by a boiler explosion at a potato chip plant south of Hermiston, Oregon, sent several people to the hospital with minor injuries. The Shearer food plant, as reported by the Oregonian, supplies much of the western U.S. with potatoes and corn chips. And you can see there is a trend here, right? This is a lot of different fires in a very short period of time. A very short period of time. Friends, even if it's the entire year, which so far we're in February, but even if the entire year, we're only just about done with the 4th month of this year, right? I can't remember off the top of my head what the average is, but I believe on average for an entire year, you expect something like 15 of these fires. I could just be pulling that number out of a hat, to be honest with you, because I'm not really 100% sure why I have that number in my head right now. I believe I read it, but I don't know. In other words, fact check me. But the point is, we're not even a quarter of the year yet, through a quarter of the year yet. And we're already counting, what was this? There was like 5 that we just listed in March, 3 in April. We're about to see our 3rd here in February. And I'm sure that this is not an exhaustive list, right? Because they were saying nearly 2 dozen. And I doubt that this article is just, interested in listing 24 separate, cases, right? The point here is just to say we're having a big, man, I don't even know what the word to say here is. I don't want to call it a crisis yet, because you never want to be, shooting too high up. I don't want people to be panicking, in other words. But it's a problem. It's a big problem. It's a problem that you need to be planning around. It's a problem that you need to be making sure your family is taken care of. I worded that terribly, but you guys know what I'm trying to say, right? You need to be taking care of your family in regards to this problem. You need to be planning around this problem. I, for one, think that it would be wise for people when they're going to stores to perhaps buy canned food that you don't plan on eating, and just kind of keep it in a safe somewhere. Not literally a safe, but you know what I mean, like some kind of a safe place, right? a lot of people think that that's a little bit insane. I think that that's just something you should be doing always, to be honest with you. You never know what's going to happen. You never know when the next earthquake, hailstorm, hurricane, invasion, rebellion, any of that kind of stuff is about to happen, right? But when you see this kind of stuff on the news, it should be something that perks your ears a little bit and leads you to the conclusion maybe I should be stocking up on some stuff just in case. You know, it's great that we have hospitals. It's great that we have grocery stores. It's great. It's great. It's great. It's great. It's great. But maybe it wouldn't be the dumbest idea in the world for me to have my own little stockpile of gasoline and my own little stockpile of medicine and my own little stockpile of food and clean water and maybe get myself a water filter or something like that, right? Because I'll tell you what, friends, it is not in any way, shape, or form a guarantee that we continue to live in this incredibly prosperous society that we live in. In fact, it's becoming less and less of a possibility, let alone a guarantee, as each day goes on. And this is just one of the many problems that are leading me to this conclusion. Because remember, on top of fires at food processing plants, we also have the fact that over 50% of all dollars just came into existence since 2020. We're experiencing massive inflation, right? We also have the fact that there are tons of people moving out of uh, liberal societies, which means they're bringing their mass amount of money from inflated economies into economies that are actually functioning, creating housing crises and other sorts of pricing crises that are having people literally rented out of their homes, right? This is on top of the fact that we have major labor shortages, primarily because people are either being fired because they don't want to do some sort of a vaccination or something like that, or people are having their bills paid by some government agency, right? And so why go to work? And so on and so forth. It's just another cog. And I mean, look at the price of gas, right? Gas is like $4.50 in Idaho. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like in California and New York City, right? Or Canada or things of that nature. Think of the international situation we got with Vladimir Putin at the moment, and also communist China for that matter. But like there is a lot of problems stacking up on each other, and I don't want people to live in a state of panic. I don't want people to be sitting here, chewing on their fingernails, saying, "Oh, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next?" That's just a way to completely eliminate your quality of life. But you do need to be prepared. You need to be mentally prepared, emotionally prepared, physically prepared, spiritually prepared. Um, and if you have kids, maybe take them out shooting so that they know how to, hit a bunny or two, just in case that becomes necessary. Take them out fishing so that they know how to catch a trout just in case that becomes necessary. Take them camping and maybe don't bring any of your usual amenities when you go camping just in case that becomes necessary, right? And by the way, plenty of you adults could use that as well. I mean, I don't know how to hunt. I've never hunted in my entire life, right? I should probably learn because it's going to maybe be very important soon. Um, I do know how to fish, so I'm not completely useless. Regardless, I'm just saying this is something that should be taken. I don't think that we need to be in a state of panic, especially those of us who are Christians, because we have faith in the man who has control over all of it. Well, I guess I shouldn't say man, but you guys know what I mean. God, right? God has control over the all of it. And so there's no reason for us to be in a panic. That said, it is also, I think, important that we are wise, right? Hezekiah trusted God, but Hezekiah also built a tunnel. At any rate, a third fire in February caused the Lewis Dreyfus Company in Claypool, Indiana, a soybean processing plant and biodiesel plant, the largest fully integrated soybean processing plant in the U.S., to suspend production. Soybeans are disgusting and you shouldn't eat them, by the way. But I digress. Thankfully, no injuries were reported. A blaze at a poultry processing plant in the Hamilton region of Oregon in January caused extensive damage but caused no injuries. The multiple alarm fire, as reported by Global News, will cost millions in repairs. Firefighters responded to a fire in January at the Cargill Nutrina plant in Lecomte, Louisiana. The fire took more than 12 hours to put out, as reported by KALB TV, an NBC/CBS/CW affiliated news station. And then the next ones they're getting into go into next year. I'm not personally interested in reading about the ones next year, although they are still important. but you get the point, right? This is something that has been unfortunately growing in trend here, and it's something that is I think concerning. Again, don't work yourselves into a panic. Again, don't sit here and start thinking to yourselves, "Hey, this is the end of the world. The apocalypse is now." Um, However, I think you absolutely, absolutely need to be planning around these kinds of things just in case, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what tomorrow holds. And frankly, I don't either, right? I think the best way to make sure you're prepared for this, both now and any time that it could potentially happen in the future, is to stock up on non perishables, to stock up on food that has an incredibly long shelf life, stock up on medicine and gasoline. And you should always do that, by the way, not just when you think some potential crisis is going to happen. In other words, if the dollar's doing great and there's no crime on the streets and everybody's got food in their bellies and choices as far as the food in their bellies and they're getting it 3 times a day and they can even gorge themselves and go give to the poor later when they're done, right? If all that is true, you should still have yourself a little rainy day stockpile. Um, and I'm not just of things like money, which is important in the case of a functioning economy, or precious metals, which are important in the case of a non functioning economy, but also in foodstuffs, clothing, medicine, oil, stuff of that nature. Learn how to fish, learn how to hunt, go garden. Um, these are just incredibly important and basic things for us to learn. And, we never want to be caught in a position where it actually is the case this time. There's so many times, people talk about, oh, well, the conspiracy theorist who cried wolf, right? Because of how many different times there's been a conspiracy theory and nothing happened. The thing is it only takes one time for the conspiracy theorist to be right. And that one time will literally ruin your entire existence, right? I'm sure a lot of people in Rome thought, all of these doomsday soothsayers talking about the end of Rome, the end of Rome, the end of Rome, and yet Rome still is, and then all of a sudden it wasn't, right? Um, there you go, right? There you go. And by the way, I love this. I can eat food, I can't eat gold. I'm not saying don't stockpile on cash and precious metals and stuff like that, because maybe the economy does function, but if the economy does not function, well, what's a shiny rock going to do for you, right? Learn how to fish, learn how to garden, stockpile on some stuff that's necessary, and always keep that in mind, even if the Lord is gracious to us and reestablishes our country 1,000-fold, right? Last thing we're going to talk about today. Yes, we do have another thing to talk about. I understand it's been an hour and 25 minutes, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And that is Elon Musk has officially purchased Twitter. So it belongs to him now. It's his. He gave them $44 billion, which is far more money than they deserve. I think the actual value of Twitter was like $5 billion. But regardless, gave them a whole bunch of money, and they have decided to accept his proposal. And, Elon Musk buys Twitter. Now, much like the Brett Kavanaugh situation, where Brett Kavanaugh was being slandered as a gang rapist and all this other kind of stuff, and so obviously we wanted to defend him because he was not guilty of these things, but also at the same time we wanted to make sure everybody knew that Brett Kavanaugh was a terrible Chief Justice pick, at least in our opinion. We have a similar thing going on here. On the one end, it is hilarious to see how many people are terrified at the prospect of free speech, because that is all that Elon Musk has actually said he wants to do. He wants to create a more liberated environment in Twitter, right? And the liberals are just completely exploding over this idea. However, that said, I don't trust Elon Musk as far as I can throw him. And I'm going to explain to you guys why. But suffice it to say, the dude is creepy. The dude has ideas which are just absolutely foul, in my opinion. And I'm getting a little worried. And I say this somewhat tongue in cheek, because really I'm a lot of worried at just how quickly conservatives are willing to jump in bed with people who are just very, very questionable. That we have this with Trump. We had this with Jenner. We had this with Nicki Minaj, with Kid Rock. Elon Musk is not somebody who I think we should be trusting. I just simply don't buy that Elon Musk is this conservative paragon of virtue. I just don't. I'm sorry. Elon Musk is the same guy who created Neuralink and wants to have people, microchipped so that they can have their brains literally linked to the internet. Say what you will about his opinions on freedom of speech, but that is freaky. That's weird. Also, the dude is the guy behind Tesla, right? In other words, the guy behind the number one, hey, screw the fossil fuels industry business in the entire world, which also happens to be somewhat of a liberal staple, by the way. I love that all these people will drive Teslas and yet we'll talk about how they don't like Elon Musk, right? This is the same dude who has been talking about AI taking over the world and yet actively is involved in building robots. That's bizarre, right? And by the way, as a commenter, Nicholas Proclaimer Messiah, Shalom brother, thank you for being here, has just pointed out, he also just gave a whole lot of money to some very detestable people. So I don't know where people get their rocks off thinking that Elon Musk is going to be the savior of humanity and that we're all going to, live fruitfully and multiply and sing kumbaya because he bought Twitter. I'm sorry, I don't trust the guy. That doesn't mean that it isn't, very much apparent how hypocritical the liberals actually are. That doesn't mean that there isn't a huge lesson to be learned here in the fact that so many progressives literally want to leave Twitter because they're scared that somebody might have the right to say stuff. That doesn't mean that we're not seeing articles from the New Yorker and the New York Times and the LA Times and stuff like that talking about, oh, how the United States could block this purchase. Oh, how the United States government could make sure that it's still not a misinformation, what would you call that? Disinformation center or whatever. I don't know. All of that stuff is still true. But it is also just as true that Elon Musk is the guy who used this pandemic to triple his net worth, is the guy who founded Neuralink, which literally seeks to have you microchipped and connected to the internet, your brain connected to the internet. It's the same guy who wants to have us traveling to space and colonizing Mars. It's the same guy who, just gave these $45 million to a bunch of very detestable people in Silicon Valley. I don't understand why people trust this man. I don't understand why people trust this man. But anyways, getting to the article, go ahead and pull up here. Elon Musk bought Twitter, so here's what he says he'll do next. And for those of you who don't know, which I highly doubt is anybody on the entire planet, but this is Elon Musk right here. So this is from NPR. NPR is just the absolute worst, but comparatively to some of the other articles I saw, this one's not as bad. And this is originally written by Bobby Allen of NPR. So let's go ahead and read. Elon Musk will soon hold the keys to Twitter. The company announced on Monday that it has accepted the Tesla CEO's $44 billion offer to take the company private. That means the world's richest person who has a penchant for theatrics and erratic behavior is about to have the power to reshore discourse on a social network used by more than 200 million people every day. So how might Musk wield that power? Here are some proposals for Twitter that he has floated. Now, already, we do have to note that this article is trying to slander the rich as if people who are rich can't possibly be good people, right? This sentence here, I'm going to go ahead and highlight it for you guys. That means the world's richest person who has a penchant for theatrics and erratic behavior is about to have the power to reshape discourse on a social network used by more than 200 million people every day. What they're trying to say there is, and you should be concerned. right? And of all of the different things I don't trust about Elon Musk, the fact that he's a billionaire is not one of them. Frankly, I don't have any sort of distrust for people just simply because they have money. Um, I'm actually a quite committed capitalist, and I even think I even think sometimes that God directly blessed people because of their good behavior. I'm not a prosperity gospel person, right? But we do see in scripture that God has people who he uses. And one of the ways that he can use people is by understanding they're going to be a good steward of a lot of earthly carnal things. And so he gives them to them. For example, look at somebody like Truett Cathy, right? That doesn't mean obviously that every billionaire has got their billions because they're a great Christian. That's not what I'm trying to suggest. That would be prosperity gospel, right? But it is to say that, I think people like Truett Cathy. I personally think Denzel Washington is another really, um, really good, rich Christian. Um, a lot of people have been given this money precisely because they are good stewards of that which God will give them, right? So I'm not anti-money. I'm actually quite capitalistic. And that is something that annoys me about these articles. The whole idea that, well, he has all this money, therefore he must be evil. That's not true at all. That's not true at all. He has all this money potentially because of not so savory things. In fact, when it comes to Elon, I think that there is some weirdness behind his richness. For example, the fact that he tripled his net worth during the pandemic. That's odd, right? The things he gets money for, Tesla and Neuralink and creating robots, yeah, I mean, it's legal, but it's weird, right? So, there's obviously a lot to be said about Elon Musk himself, but I don't think that what this article is trying to point out, which is, oh, he's the richest person ever, and so therefore you should be concerned. Sorry, that's not how it works. Loosen up content rules in the name of free speech. The Tesla and SpaceX CEO describes himself as a free speech absolutist. I do hope that's true. Um, anyways, as a free speech absolutist and has criticized what he sees as excessive moderation on online platforms. He nodded to these beliefs in the statement, announcing the purchase by saying that free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. I actually think YouTube is probably a little bit more of that than Twitter is. Only 200 million people use Twitter. Um, and actually, I think if I remember correctly, Twitter accounts for less than 1% of the actual politically involved people. But YouTube is like 2 billion plus and is a bedrock for information in multiple countries all across the world. Nobody doesn't use YouTube, right? Literally nobody doesn't use YouTube. Well, I shouldn't say literally, right? But almost nobody. Almost nobody doesn't use YouTube. I've never met somebody who doesn't use YouTube. That's for sure. Um, He nodded to these beliefs in a statement announcing the purchase by saying that free speech is. Wait, I just read that. Sorry. Musk has argued that social networks should not remove comments that, while offensive, are still legal. I agree. During a recent interview with a TED conference, he said, at a TED conference, rather, he said, if it's a gray area, let the tweet exist, end quote. Now, of course, do I actually think that Musk is going to operate in that way? I don't, personally. I think he's going to end up being a little bit more, censor happy than he's actually giving off right now. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Hopefully, I'm wrong about that. One of the possibilities here that does exist is God does use evil and wicked people for his own purposes, and perhaps God is using somebody like Musk, who, despite all of his flaws, is a free speech absolutist. I'm assuming, by the way, that he is a free speech absolutist when I say this. I don't know that I agree with this, but perhaps it is possible that sorry, I just read a comment, and it made me laugh. That was funny. Anyways, fair enough. At least Brother Nicholas does know some people who do not use YouTube. At any rate, though, it is possible that God is using this person to buy Twitter so that people who he wants to actually have the word out, namely the gospel, and a way to change the society in a Christocentric manner, right? Can actually have their voices be heard. That's possible. That kind of thing has happened before, right? For example, you look at somebody like Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was used of God. You look at somebody like Cyrus, and in fact, Cyrus is an even better example because Cyrus was used of God in order to rebuild the temple, right? Now, did Cyrus care about rebuilding the temple? I don't think there's any indication that he was a believer, right? But nonetheless, he is somebody who was used mightily of God. So that's possible. It's also possible that Elon Musk is real buddy with a lot of people we don't trust, which is true, by the way, and that he is the face of of what they would like to see on the opposition, right? And even another possibility exists too, which is that Elon Musk is just simply up to his own nefarious means, right? Up to his own nefarious agenda. Um, I don't think there's any reason to suggest if we could prove both of those first two scenarios wrong, right? If we could prove that Elon Musk did not have good intentions and also that Elon Musk was not part of the conspiratorial cabal, that wouldn't mean that we were off the hook here, right? Because Elon Musk is still the Neuralink guy, still the Tesla guy, still the guy who tripled his net worth during a pandemic when everybody lost money, right? So there's a lot of different possibilities that are on the table here as far as what's going to happen next. Um, I don't know. I obviously we can hold out hope. I hope that Twitter gets better. I don't think that it will, but we'll see. Twitter currently bans harassment, abuse, and posts that wish physical harm to someone. The platform has other guardrails too, like a prohibition on misinformation related to COVID-19. Now, obviously, misinformation related to COVID-19 is specifically whatever information they decide is misinformation. By the way, subscribe to my Rumble because that comment alone may get this video taken down. Also, when they say harassment and abuse, that is something I've literally had people attack my religion, attack my race, attack my uh, cognitive abilities, right? Saying things like, oh, you're autistic, you're stupid, you're retarded, all this other kind of stuff. Nothing ever happens, but I slip up once and call somebody a moron, which is you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be rude, right? It's better to be polite when having these kinds of conversations. And I get a 30-day Twitter ban, right? And I think a lot of people have documented this before, just how in fact, PragerU did a very good job documenting it. They still lost in court, but regardless, um, you know, there's a well, anyways, I digress. The point is, the article here is trying to say, oh, well, they're just trying to go against the bullies and those people who give misinformation. When in reality, that's just simply not true. They've censored doctors. They've censored the president of the literal president of the United States, right? Which I am no Trump supporter, but that is still like, dude. They've censored numerous news agencies, and also they've even censored satire. The Babylon Bee is a satirical. Um, I don't think you'd call them a news organization because of the fact that they're satire, but their satire is all related to the news. But they're a satirical organization, right? They've been censored for crying out loud. I mean, in what way can satire possibly be construed as harassment, abuse, or a post that wishes physical harm on someone, right? And again, that's not an endorsement. None of these are endorsements of anybody. I'm not endorsing, Donald Trump. I'm not endorsing Babylon Bee. I'm not endorsing anybody here. However, I am pointing out that the idea that Twitter is only banning big mean bullies who wish to show up at your house and blast you, that's just simply not the case. In fact, Twitter openly lets very violent individuals remain on Twitter. There was a movie director, I can't remember his name, but he was talking about how he wanted to put Barron Trump in a cage in a room full of pedophiles. Barron Trump, the at the time 10-year-old son of Donald Trump. The Taliban and ISIS and Al Qaeda have all had long-standing Twitter accounts. On top of that, we also have, people like the violent. What did that like? Smash Fascism DC or something like that. I can't remember their exact name. But there are definitely a lot of people who are, supporters of violent Antifa actions and what they call direct action, who have been allowed to keep their keep their Twitter. AOC has said stuff like we need to be keeping a list of people who supported Donald Trump, and making sure that they're held accountable for it. Literally saying we need to physically punish people at the hands of the law because of who they voted for. She still gets to keep her Twitter account, right? So not only do they not ban people who only harass, abuse, and post physical harm or misinformation, but on top of that, you also have the fact that people who are harassing people, who are abusing people, who are wishing physical harm on people, who are sometimes even going out of their way to cause people physical harm and using Twitter as their rallying point to get a crowd to do so, nothing's happening to them, right? Experts who study social networks fret about Musk's push to loosen the rules of engagement on Twitter. They say that could give license to harassers, trolls, and others who abuse the platform to target people. They also worry relaxing the rules on Twitter will empower those looking to exploit the platform by spreading misinformation or flat out lies about political events, government officials, and matters related to public health and safety. Now, it is important to note that they literally just came out and said it right there, right? They literally just came out and said, look, we don't want to give license to these people who spread quote misinformation, which they're the ones who get to dictate what misinformation is, about political offense, government officials, or matters related to public health and safety. So they just plainly and blatantly admit that they are supporters of censorship, specifically of one political side and of a certain set of ideologies, right? And of course, this has been talked about for a long period of time. If you want to know, it's if you want to have a really in-depth look at Twitter's censorship of conservatives or Twitter censorship of Christians, I think David Wood of Acts 17 Apologetics does a great job demonstrating that through some of the satire that he's created. But I digress. Now, again, doesn't mean that we trust Musk. It just simply means that this is what they have very blatantly said they don't like about Musk. By the way, I would like to point out in the live chat, Nicholas Proclaimer Messiah says, is Elon Musk being used to make Twitter more effective because, as CJ was saying, so few people were on it? And that could be highly possible. There was a time when Twitter had 500 million daily users. That's obviously less than 50%, or they now have less than 50% with it being 200 million. So that could totally be the case, right? They played their card a little bit too strongly. There was a massive reaction to it, and now maybe this is a way to kind of tone down the reaction. Who knows? We really don't know. We'll obviously find out, but at the moment, we do not know. Create an edit button so users can change their tweets, which is kind of ridiculous that this doesn't exist on Twitter anyways, but one of the most requested product changes among Twitter users is an edit button. Unlike Facebook, Instagram, and other social media apps, it is not possible to change content on Twitter once it's published. Musk has said he supports letting people change what their tweets say, a proposal that has stirred a heated debate amongst academics, journalists, and other heavy users of the platform. Yes, there is a heated debate about whether or not you should have the right to edit tweets. Does that make any sense? No, it does not, but this is the world we live in. The fear among experts. Now, remember, experts are the gods of this world, right? Experts are the ones who we are supposed to bow down to and give our little sacrificial lambs to and all that other kind of stuff because they have a couple fancy letters behind their name. The FUDs and the DERs, as I like to call them, which is a play on the doctor and PhD letters that they spend so much money to acquire, when in reality they're all just, not all, but a lot of them are just a bunch of morons, right? And that's not a diss on education itself. There are plenty of highly educated people who have used that as a means of, enlightening themselves in a good way and spreading that information to the populace in such a way that it's easily digestible and all this other kind of stuff, right? I'm not anti-experts as people like to construe me. I am, however, anti-worship of experts, and this is a perfect example of worship of experts, right? The fear among experts is that adding an edit button feature would be weaponized by bad actors who could use it to cover up abuse or harassment as if it never happened, or to dupe or manipulate people. Now, of course, this is completely ridiculous. It negates the fact that you typically have edit histories. It negates the fact that people have screenshots. It negates the fact that there is a record of what was originally tweeted in, Twitter's databases itself. Blah 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 blah. Right, and of course, nobody's ever been saying this kind of stuff about Facebook or about YouTube or about the fact that you can take down a tweet or anything along those lines. So it's just basically a bunch of nothing. But all of this nothing is being used in a way to say, like, oh, well, you need to be against this because that's not the very woke position to have. And even as this article points out, other safeguards could be put in place so that tweets could be edited to clean up typos, while also showing a history of how the tweet was edited to preserve the original content. That's what numerous other websites do. For example, if you have a Facebook, that's what Facebook does. I don't personally have a problem with that, but whatever. Open up Twitter's algorithm to the public. Musk has said that the software that determines what people see and how widely content spreads on Twitter should be cracked open. He supports placing Twitter's algorithm on GitHub, a site popular with programmers for sharing computer code. While most advocates of more transparency at social media companies say that they could be, or say that, let me redo this, sorry. While some advocates of more transparency at social media companies say that oh, you know what? This is a typo. That's why it's so hard for me to read. It says companies say that could be a step. Here I am thinking that I just can't read English. But actually, you're messing with me, NPR. Don't do that. Anyways, so what are they trying to say here? While some advocates of more transparency at social media companies say that this could be a step toward greater openness, this is what I assume they're trying to say. Others say revealing Twitter's dense and complicated algorithm to the public would accomplish very little. A social network the size of Twitter processes billions of pieces of content every day. How and why tweets go viral and how tweet recommendation system work is so dense and complex that the company's own software can be perplexed. Our company's own software engineers, can be perplexed trying to understand its logic. I believe that is an excuse. I don't know if Musk will actually do this because I think it would be, well, let me put it this way. If Musk has nefarious goals, he definitely will not do this, right? Because what opening Twitter's algorithm up to the public would do is it would demonstrate shadow banning, and it would demonstrate people forcing, quote, expert opinions and forcing certain political positions and certain philosophical positions and certain religious positions and so on up into the mainstream, right? It would reveal that to us all, and it would no longer be a conspiracy theory. We'd actually be able to see and say, no, hey, we actually have a example here, right? Of you guys shadow banning, of you guys putting up voices that are not necessarily popular, of you guys creating artificially a trend, in other words, right? So that's what would actually be accomplished if we did have Twitter's algorithm opened up to the public. Whether or not it was dense and complex and people couldn't understand it, I mean, that who cares, right? A lot of people would consider the bills that pass through or pass through the certain governments or the different ecclesiastical papers published by Rome or stuff like that to be too dense for the public. And yet a lot of times I'll read them here for you guys, and you guys who are part of the public will enjoy and understand and be edified by the content. So obviously, if it's too dense for some, it's not going to be too dense for others. And frankly, that's just an excuse that they have because they don't want Twitter's algorithm to be made public. Now, I don't think Twitter's algorithm will be made public because, like I said, I don't trust Elon Musk, and I don't think that he is. I don't think that he has a bunch of good and fine and dandy plans here, right? I think that would go a long way to demonstrating his potential positive agenda. It could also end up being, just a way to get people, to quit being skeptical, right? I don't know. There's so many different possibilities in a situation like this, especially because of how little trust I actually have for Elon himself. And by the way, even if Elon is 1000% in the right here, in other words, even if Elon is going to is actually going to reinstate a whole bunch of people and is going to give us a free speech platform and is going to reveal the algorithm to everybody. If all of that is true, if he has no nefarious agenda whatsoever, I still won't trust him. I'll trust him as far as Twitter's concerned, right? In the same way that, like, I may not like somebody who owns the local barber shop, but maybe the barbers he employs are good employees, right? But he's still the Neuralink guy. He's still the Tesla guy. He's still, right? So just keep that in mind. Even in the best case scenario, Elon Musk is still not somebody we should be trusting. Combating the proliferation of bots on, launch a war on bot armies is another thing he says he wants to do. Combating the proliferation of bots on Twitter, fake accounts that are programmed to respond to Twitter on certain topics is another change Musk favors. Musk's business empire has been known to attract its fair share of bots, including bots supportive of his electric car company Tesla that attack Musk critics. He has said he would like to temper those kinds of bots, but he has suggested that there should be a crackdown on scammy bots promoting cryptocurrency hustles. Quote, if our Twitter bid succeeds, we will defeat the spam bots or die trying, end quote, Musk tweeted last week, adding that he'd like to authenticate all real humans. Which is interesting, I guess. I wonder, because, a lot of people have multiple Twitter accounts because of the fact that they do things in multiple fields. So I wonder how that would work. I don't know. Anyways, excuse me. Next, scrap advertisements. Right now, almost 90% of Twitter's revenue comes from advertising, but the company has struggled to attract advertisers to the platform, which often devolves into political firestorms and ugly online brawls. I would just like to point out that that is not true. There is a common myth in the world that says that all these companies, YouTube and Google and Twitter, because of the fact that they make money from advertisers, people like to believe this myth that they are actually kind of held at gunpoint by the advertisers. But that's not true at all. Most advertisers who decide that they're going to leave the platform end up coming back in a very short period of time. On top of that, it's a very small amount of advertisers who actually ever do leave the platform. And more importantly than either of those two things is the people who really have the power here are the social media juggernauts, right? Twitter is nowhere near what YouTube is as far as how many people are on it, right? But even with 200 million people, there is no company in the entire planet worth its salt that, barring some major political agenda, is going to say, you know what, I'm going to just go ahead and not advertise to 200 million people. And you might say, okay, you just said barring some major political agenda, but don't a lot of these guys have that political agenda? Yeah, but their political agenda is not greater than their love of money, right? Believe me, the head CEO of Disney would much prefer to be making money than he would prefer to have drag queen story hour, right? He'd like to do both. He would like to do both. But if he could only choose one, if you put a gun to his head and said, hey, destruction of Disney as a corporation, or you get to have your political agenda met, the man's greedy, he's going to take the money. Everybody's greedy, everybody takes the money, right? And obviously that everybody does come with a small asterisk, but it is a small asterisk. So, when people say that, oh, well, they struggle to actually get advertisers, it's just simply not true. Any social media company with their kind of capital who puts their foot down and says, sorry, I'm just going to have it be this way, and you're either going to have the luxury, the privilege of being on my platform, or you won't. Any company that actually did that would immediately have people crying on their hands and knees, crawling back to them saying, please, please, oh, please, will you let me actually have my company on your platform, right? And by the way, one of the ways that we know that is the fact that everybody who has 100,000 subscribers on YouTube gets advertising. Like literally everybody. Major atheist and Christian channels, they get advertising. Major conservative and liberal channels both get advertising. Troll accounts whose sole goal is to make people angry, yet still get advertising. And in those particular cases, that means that the company actually actively sought them out, right? But anyways, with the company going private, it will not be under the same pressure from shareholders to continuously grow advertising revenue. Musk has said it should move to a subscription model, which would mean you'd actually have to pay for it. And I don't know. I don't like that personally, but whatever. Twitter has already taken steps in that direction with the introduction last year of Twitter Blue, a premium service that will cost $2.99 a month for additional features, like an undo button that allows for tweets to be recalled before they are sent. It's weird because they were just talking about how that shouldn't be something we do. Musk has said Twitter Blue should be cheaper and that if people are paying, they shouldn't have to see advertisements, and that the cryptocurrency that started as a joke, Dogecoin, should be an acceptable form of payment for a Twitter subscription. Big unknown, reinstate Donald Trump. Musk has not publicly said whether he would allow former President Donald Trump back on the platform after the company permanently suspended him for rhetoric that broke its rules and stoked the siege on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. By the way, I'm not a Trump fan. However, that is wrong. Trump never broke Twitter's rules. Trump also never stoked the siege on the U.S. Capitol. In fact, Trump very explicitly said the opposite, namely that people should not be acting violently at the Capitol. Compare that to what Vice President Kamala Harris said about the Black Lives Matter riots, and it's literally no comparison. Again, not a Donald Trump fan, but I am a fan of truth. In an interview with Fox News on Monday, Trump called Musk a good man, saying he was pleased with the billionaire's acquisition, but Trump said he has no plans to try to return to Twitter. It says try to return to the Twitter. You guys really, NPR. I mean, how much money does NPR have? Do you guys not have an editor? Like, my geez, man. Instead, Trump said he will be focusing on his alternative social network known as Truth Social, which, as of this point, does not exist. At an all hands meeting, on Monday afternoon, a Twitter employee asked CEO Parag Agrawal, probably said that wrong, whether Trump would be reinstated. Agrawal said that was a question for Musk. Once the deal closes, we don't know which direction the platform will go, end quote, he said. And one of the directions I think it probably will go is that Agrawal will probably not be the CEO anymore. But regardless, there's the article. We're done with it. To reiterate my personal opinions, I am hopeful that there is free speech reestablished on Twitter, but it is not a hope based in reality. It is a hope based in hope. What do I mean by that? That's what I would want to happen, right? But it's not what I think is going to happen. I don't trust Elon Musk. Even if Elon Musk ends up being 100% beneficial for us in this, I still won't trust Elon Musk. And I want everybody to remember who Elon Musk is. Elon Musk is the guy who's building robots and AI. Elon Musk is the guy who tripled his net worth while everybody else was locked in their homes. Elon Musk is the guy who wants to connect your brain to the internet via microchip. Look up Neuralink. I'm literally not kidding. Look up Neuralink. I mean, even if all of that wasn't bad enough, Elon Musk endorsed Kanye West for president and wanted to name his son like MS45X-7 or something like that. And I'm obviously being a little bit exaggeratory with that. But it's really not if you actually look at what he wanted to name his kid. The point is just to say, I don't trust him. I don't think any of us should be trusting him. I wonder if Musk is going to be an integral part of the actual New World Order. In other words, the one that has been prophesied via the Bible. It seemed like we were right around the corner 200 years ago, and here we still are. So who knows? But when I see guys like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, Pope Francis, Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, I mean, I could see these guys caballing together. In fact, I could even see them each having their own little cabal that, each having their own little cabal and their own little agenda that just kind of uses each other, right? because I'm not committed to the idea that the cabal all has to be in line with each other. In fact, one thing I've said quite often on this program is I think just because the Pope is involved in your cabal doesn't mean that you're involved in his, right? In other words, I think the Vatican has its own agenda, and I think it's willing to work with communist China and willing to work with Bilderberg and willing to work with all these other guys. But I still think it has its agenda. I think the Pope and the Vatican has its own agenda, and that it's pursuing that agenda. And it may join other people's cabals, but those people aren't inside the secret room with the Vatican. I could see that kind of thing happening with a lot of these other groups too. Musk and the Vatican, for example, I could see them working together, but each having their own nefarious agenda, almost like cabalception, right? But whatever it is, I don't know. I don't trust it. I don't like it. We'll see what happens. Obviously, our trust and faith is in the Lord. So in the end, it's kind of all for naught. What I mean by that is just simply that we have a higher station than this. And while I'm certainly not one of those who's like, don't worry about absolutely anything that happens on the planet because we're all going to heaven. I mean, clearly we have to live our lives here. God tells us to be good stewards of what we have. We should have good government. We should have a lot of, we still have a lot of, what's the word there? Oh, shoot, I kind of lost my train of thought there. Family, friends, that kind of stuff. Sorry. And so I'm not saying that we need to just forget about the world, but I am saying, that should be a comfort for us, is that our trust is in Messiah and not in this world. So with that, friends, had a couple comments I wanted to address. And like I said, this is going to be something we do from here on out, where I pick out a few comments that I think people want me to address. And so I'm going to look at them. So Brother Timothy says earlier that he believes that it could be a slippery slope for us to give extra protections to churches, because churches should not get a special status that could end up being theocratic. I kind of addressed this in the segment where we were talking about Tony Spell. There's certainly a possibility that could happen. Like if people start to give special privileges to Christian churches in general. That being said, though, I think that there's a couple things we kind of need to understand with this. The first one being that there is ways around that, namely general protections for all houses of worship. In other words, if the church and the temple of Tao both have the same laws in regards to their governance, that's how you get around a potential for theocracy, right? And what does that mean? That means that in each individual place, the individual congregations can worship as they see fit, of course, provided they're not like sacrificing people and stuff like that, right? And if that's the case, then I don't have any issue at all. I don't think there's any of a potential threat to the freedom of religion that we have here. And so when I read that bill, that's the language I'll be looking for, is nice, general, vague language that provides equal protections to me as a Christian that it would to you as a whatever you might be. I know Brother Timothy is also a Christian, but the potential Catholic, Mormon, Muslim, Sikh, Tao, all that kind of stuff. By the way, in case anybody's concerned with what I'm saying, that's not me saying we should all come together. It's me saying we should all have equal protections under the law, right? Anyways, so that's the first thing that I wanted to address here. The next thing here was from Richard Neal. He was asking, because obviously this is meant to create greater protections for churches. And he was asking, so are there like churches being burned down and looted and stuff like that in Louisiana? Not quite that far yet. Right now, it is simply Louisiana is just going pedal to the metal in regards to their persecution of Tony Spell, despite the fact that California has stopped going after Pastor MacArthur, despite the fact that New York has stopped going after the rabbis that they were going after and the little group of nuns that they were going after also. All these other places that you would consider so much worse have quit, or at least have temporarily ceased. Louisiana has not. Louisiana is still trying to put Pastor Tony Spell in prison. He has been fighting against it since March of 2020. And right now, we're just currently waiting on the Louisiana Supreme Court to decide whether or not this is constitutional or not. So next point we have here is actually, let me go ahead and see if I can. There was another thing here I did see. There's a couple other things here I did see that I wanted to look at. I guess one of them was what Nicholas had said about Elon Musk making Twitter more effective, but I actually did address that in the stream. Richard Neal does ask right now, if it passed by the House and Senate, would the governor sign this bill into law? Very likely no. John Bel Edwards is actually the leader of the anti-spell crusade. So the likelihood is if this law were to be passed, it would be vetoed and then would have to be passed by 2/3. Now, it was unanimously passed by the House. So that shouldn't be a problem in the House of Representatives, the Louisiana House of Representatives, to be clear. But it is definitely potentially a problem for the Senate, the state Senate that they have there, right? And I don't think John Bel Edwards will sign it into law at all. I don't have even the slightest inclination towards believing that. I think he'll definitely veto it. I mean, the man has a personal vendetta against Tony Spell, right? So, I mean, that's just about as big as it gets. You know what I mean? As far as definitive evidence that he is not on what we would consider to be our side, right? Let me see what else we had here. There was another point I think I wanted to address. Denzel Washington is not in the same category of wealth as the elitists. To be fair, that's true. He's got hundreds of millions, but he doesn't have billions. So that is fair. However, the other person I had mentioned, S. Truett Cathy, he did die with a net worth of $5 billion. And that's certainly that's even more money than some of the elites. Now, when you get to the very top of the top, it does appear to be all kind of the same crew of people, right? You have Michael Bloomberg is up there, Mark Zuckerberg is up there, Bill Gates is up there, obviously Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and so maybe even 5 billion that Truett Cathy has is still not quite what we mean when we say the elites. It is also entirely possible, though, that elites is more a group of people as far as their, like, how do I word this? I think the elites is more a group of people who share the same views than it is share the same pocketbook, right? In other words, I see the possibility of you making billions of dollars for various reasons. George Lucas has about $5 billion. Truett Cathy, like I said, $5 billion. Michael Jordan's got $1.1 billion. And all these different people, I think, have made their billions legitimately. Whereas, and even to be fair, even some of the guys like Zuckerberg, right? I mean, Zuckerberg didn't do anything illegal or evil as far as how he made his money. Now, what he did once he had his money was certainly area of concern, but he made his money legitimately by virtue of everybody really liking the product that was Facebook, right? But I think the thing that links these guys together more so than all the money they have is the fact that they all agree with each other politically, and probably philosophically and religiously as well. But that's obviously my opinion. I think that it is certainly possible, that the 5 billion. I mean, because $5 billion of Truett Cathy is, I mean, what, 200 billion, excuse me, less than what Elon Musk has. So it is possible that even there, I'm still kind of making a false comparison in a way. But I do see the point with Denzel Washington. Hundreds of millions is not even close to billions in regards to what some of these other guys have. And also, I think Denzel, because of the fact that he's a particularly good guy, I don't think he's even one of the richest actors. In other words, I don't think he's ever been one of those guys who like demands a ridiculous amount of payment. So point is taken, certainly. What else we got here? Got some stuff on Douglas Wilson. By the way, me and Brother Nicholas may at some point be talking about Douglas Wilson as well as Daily Wire, but I think the Douglas Wilson conversation is going to come first. Haven't set that up yet, and that's definitely my fault. But nonetheless, I digress. I think that's everything that I wanted to. I think that's everything that I wanted to get out of here. So thank you guys very much for watching this. If you like this episode, please remember to like and share the episode and consider subscribing if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time we go live. We're going to try and move this to 2 days a week and see if we can successfully do that. So the goal is to be on, Lord willing, every Tuesday and Thursday. Hopefully it ends up being the case. If not, I guess we'll see. Those of you who watch both of my channels, I have an open room tonight. I am going to move it about an hour and a half later. So right now it's scheduled for about 5 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to actually go live around 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. But nonetheless, if you guys are interested in being there, please do consider going over to that channel and checking it out. Also want to remind you guys, if you like the content that I am doing here, if you like everything that's going on here, I aim on making all of this stuff that I do online my full-time career. And if you think that I have earned that, you have the ability to actually help make that happen. So if you'd like to make that happen, please do consider giving either to the subscription-based service that is my Patreon, or to the one-time payment service that is my PayPal. Either way, I would certainly appreciate you guys. My only request is that you do so with trepidation, not financially burdening yourself, and also not giving money to somebody who does not deserve it. We have plenty of people out here who are giving you misinformation, who are giving you false information, who are giving you information that's just not up to par. In other words, it's good, but it's not very good as far as high standards are concerned. All this other kind of stuff. So if you guys think that I am giving you high quality content, truthful content, and content that needs to be heard, as well as not financially burdening yourselves, then do please consider giving to either of the different services. There is no tiers in the services, so if you do decide to give, you can give as much or as little as you like. And also, please do consider not only subscribing here, but also on the Rumble account, where we post these videos after the fact, just in case this channel ends up getting taken down, as well as any of the various social media platforms which I use. And you can find me on the aforementioned Twitter and Facebook, as well as the ones which you should probably be on a little bit more than those other two, namely Gab, Minds, and Parler. However, that being said, love you guys very much. Appreciate you having this, taking some time now to have a conversation with me, or to listen to me have a conversation with you, I guess, right? With all the appreciations and all that other kind of stuff. Want to ask you guys to be watchdogs, be vigilant, and of course, like always, we ask you the question: in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?